Hey there everybody, long time no talk. Fan with too much time here. Coming at you with a new extra talk. You see, I've been playing Elden Ring. A lot of Elden Ring. It has really been devouring my life. And, you know, I sort of felt it only prudent to use some of that time taken from me to give something back to you guys. And listen, if you haven't tried Elden Ring, know this. First of all, this video is full of spoilers, so be wary of that. But two, go fucking get it. The game is really good. It will engage you in a way that few games have the courage to try to engage you in. And that doesn't make it the best game ever. And heck, you know what? I might make a valid criticisms of Elden Ring video later on. Because, you know, as much as I love it, and I do, it's devouring my time like you wouldn't believe, the game is far from flawless, and there are certain things that I think could be objectively better about it. Mostly about how the game does or doesn't allow you to roleplay and characterize your character as you play, but that's a different video. In any case, before I get on to the video's content and talk to you guys about what I think the meaning of Marika is and who shattered the Elden Ring, why, and how all that kind of stuff went down and connects into the symbology of Marika as you find her when you actually enter the Erd Tree, let me just say this. I am able to write a bit more. I had a period of more intense work, but that seems to be coming down to an end, and my free time is starting to expand once more. So thanks to that, I'm going to go ahead and begin to sketch out the final parts. Well, not really sketch out. They're all sketched out, but I'm going to go ahead and begin filling out the final parts of Star Wars versus Warhammer 40k. And we will come back to that, and it will be finished, and you guys will see the conclusion of that story. It's definitely something I intend to finish, at least out to this big arc, and you will see it all end there, at the very least. So, in any case, that's coming back for sure. The Eldar story is still in the works. It's a little bit of an artsy-fartsy thing on my part, so maybe you guys like it, maybe you guys don't like it. It'll be interesting to see the reaction to it. But that is also coming along in the works, and it's not related to Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40k. I saw some of you guys thinking that, oh, the Eldar are joining into Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40k. I won't give away whether that does happen or doesn't happen at any given point, but this is not that story. This is just an independent short story on the Eldar, because the Eldar have... they're lacking in so much good fiction and have so much potential as an empowering, really potent narrative force in Warhammer 40k that I can't help but throw something into their arena, you know, help the knife ears a little bit. But that's like what's driving me to do the little Eldar short story that you guys are gonna see. Though it'll probably be one of the longer pieces I make. Who knows? You'll see when it ends. I'm gonna go ahead and shave through that long before I actually post it up. But in any case, in Elden Ring, you know, jumping into the substance of the video, of this extra talk, in Elden Ring, you enter into a land that is shattered. And, here we go, spoiler warning coming up, when you finally come into the final arena of the game, when you're allowed inside the Erd Tree, to actually confront Marika and slay a god, in the many meanings that may have, you're confronted with a rather poignant scene. Marika is crucified in the air before you, upon her own symbol no less, forming one of the symbols of the Elden Ring in the shape of her own broken body. She seems desiccated, her flesh stony like that of a dead dragon. And punctured into her side is a crimson spear. I have a lot of thoughts about what this means, and also about how the lands between came to be broken as they are. And so, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you what may be my controversial take on what all this means and what is really going on when you enter that room, and what it means in regards to everything that happened leading up to and through the shattering, the terrible war which broke the lands between. Listen closely. This is my take on some Elden Ring lore, and it begins with this opinionated observation on my part. Radagon is the Crimson Spear in Marika's side, and Marika is more than just a representation of herself in the moment that you meet her. She is a representation of herself throughout the entire ordeal that leads up to the shattering. Let me explain. In the final moments of Elden Ring, you enter into the Erd Tree, and inside find yourself in a chamber where you come face to face with what remains of Marika, the Eternal. Apparently not so eternal, at least not unagonizingly so. Following these moments, the bindings that hold her aloft crack and break, perhaps in response to your entering and burning of the Erd Tree, and when she falls, who rises? Not her, but Radagon from her own flesh. However, aside from the change of his hair length and color, there is another very distinctive difference, aside also from his physique. It is the missing spear. You'll see that the spear is just no longer present. It's gone, and it's not used against you like virtually every other weapon displayed in this entire game. I believe up until the point that you intruded, Radagon was the spear incarnate. That's why you don't meet Radagon, because Radagon is using himself as an instrument of punitive, perhaps repentance against Marika, who betrayed the Golden Order and the Greater Will, the two forces he dedicated his entire life to. Debatably, she even betrayed everybody in the lands between, which would include Rennala, the other greatest love of his life. But what we see here in Radagon potentially being the Crimson Spear, and in Marika being impaled upon it while being crucified in that symbol she is always taking, I think it means more. It actually tells us more than simply what is occurring in the present moment. It tells us what Marika has been doing all along, what caused the shattering in many ways. You see, we know that Marika began to question the fundamentalists of the Golden Order. We hear your companion, your first maiden, Melina, mention as such, using Marika's own quoted words to tell you these things.
Spoken echoes of Queen Marika linger here as well. Shall I share them with you? In Marika's own words, I declare mine intent to search the depths of the Golden Order through understanding of the proper way. Our faith, our grace is increased. Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past. My comrades, why must ye falter?
So Marika was investigating the Golden Order, investigating the Greater Will, probing it. What was she trying to discover? What was she trying to find out? It's not very clear, but it appears that she was just trying to understand it better, this unfathomable outer god known as the Greater Will and its most fanatical acolytes. Well, for whatever reason, this attempt at understanding or uncovering was not received well by the Greater Will. He saw, or rather it saw, that its pawn upon the world, Marika, its goddess, chosen and elevated into Empyrean status, was failing in matters of faith. It saw that she simply did not have what it required to continue doing whatever it is that it is doing. And so, it began to plot and to plan. And as far as Marika is concerned, I think she came to conclude that she would never really be in charge of the Elden Ring's power, or what it was used for in a large, broad sense. She would never really be the true queen of the lands between, but I think that the Greater Will demanded much more of Marika. I think it demanded control over her very flesh, her very soul, and although this was control she was forced to capitulate to it, she did not do so unquestioningly. And it was those questions that so concerned the greater will, the two fingers, and their loyal puppets in the Golden Order. So what happened? The greater will began to adjust its plans. You see, we know that Godfrey was the first Elden Lord. We know that Godfrey was chosen to become Elden Lord for his might in battle. He had to be adjusted, in fact, by the beast Sarash in order to become noble enough of countenance and demeanor to be worthy of the title of Lord, at least in the eyes of either Marika or the Greater Will. However, why replace him? Why was it that the very instant that Godfrey managed to defeat the Stormlord and cast down his final worthy adversary, he lost his grace? His golden eyes dimmed into gray. He was abandoned. And I don't think he was abandoned by Marika. I actually think that Marika probably actually really liked Godfrey. After all, she had 3 children with him. Well, I guess just 2 birthings. But the point is that she did consort with him, and I get the impression that it was more in line with her will. Yes, Godfrey was ultimately a tool, a weapon to be used against those things that threatened Marika and her power, but I think that he was an affectionate weapon for her. I think that when she sent him away, it was in place of destroying him, as the Elden power would likely require of her, simply because of its inhuman calculus when it comes to what it wants and how it wants to get it. So, he was abandoned. Not by her, I don't believe, but by the power and the will, the greater will. I think that it ordered her to abandon him, to cast him away, and I think she had no choice but to accede to these requests. But why so quickly? Why the instant that Godfrey had defeated that foe? I think it's because Godfrey had already served his purpose, and already a burning new purpose was in his place. The greater will did not want to wait any longer to begin redressing the flaws it saw in its chief agent, Marika. And so, it immediately did away with Godfrey and began the search for Radagon, a man with a certain kind of shame haunting his every step, yet a man who also, along with that shame, carried a regality, a strength, and a charisma that would allow him to become Elden Lord. I don't think this was always the plan of the Greater Will. I think that the Greater Will demanding Godfrey assume a more lord-like demeanor was evidence that it had intended Godfrey initially to be the one Elden Lord it would sit with. But once it decided that would not be the case, once it determined that Godfrey would do nothing to cure Marika of her questions and questioning nature, I think then, at that point, it decided to search for someone like Radagon, and Radagon needed to fulfill that ever-present demand of regality, charisma, the man to stand before everyone and bear the crown as Elden Lord, and must be capable of properly representing that kind of authority and glory. Radagon was so glorious, in fact, that even though he was nowhere near a match for Godfrey in pure battle, and the Carians themselves were not seen as a threat that the Greater Will would have reserved for Godfrey, despite that weakness in comparison, Radagon was, truly inspiring. Think on this. Radagon always looked upon his crimson hair with shame. It tied him to giants, potentially to a giant relative, potentially even Milos himself, the smallest of the giants, who would have been capable of interbreeding with other races. Well, the point is that, for one reason or another, be it curse or blood relation, Radagon's red hair reminded him of the enemy he first began to grow his fame fighting, the cursed giants who so objected to the Golden Order. Their profane worship of the Flame of Ruin flew straight in the face of the tenets that Radagon dedicated his entire existence to. He hated them, and he hated any resemblance to them. And so he hated that red hair of his. But do you know who liked it? Who loved it? His son, Radagon. And not just him, the red-maned knights of the lands between, and the people in general saw the crimson locks of Radagon and his progeny as a symbol of power, glory, regality. It was the sign of the Red Lion, because long had passed the time between then and the war with the giants. Few remembered those ancient aggressions, that extinct race of heretics and non-believers carrying with them and upon their shoulders a fell god who once threatened all, now lost truly just to memory thanks to the revival process of the Erd Tree. And though Radagon remembered, though he carried that kind of shame his entire life, the lands between forgot it. And they forgot it because Radagon bore himself as a lord. This is why he was chosen. He had the right bearing, the right charisma, but even more than that, that special thing that the greater will was seeking was also present in ample measure within Radagon as well. Faith. Unquestioning devotion. Though both Radagon and Marika felt incredible pressures under their roles as the rulers of the lands between and the regents for the greater will itself, unlike Marika, though Radagon may have resented that gnawing curse of responsibility and duty that had been placed on him, he never abandoned it, never forswore it, never forsook it, not like Marika did. And so he was chosen to fuse with Marika, to become one with her blood, and by doing so, to bring her back into line. It's unclear whether this process was meant to become total and complete, whether Marika would simply have subsumed Radagon and simply taken on some of his features, the desirable features, or if Radagon would have subsumed Marika and become Radagon the god versus Marika the goddess. It's unclear whether there would have needed to have been a new Elden Lord after that had been done. If it would have been done at all, it's unclear if a new being, not Marika and not Radagon, would have been created from the ultimate fusion, or if the fusion was as complete as it ever would be. The only thing that seems clear is that Marika resented the entire process.
Spoken echoes of Queen Marika linger here as well. Shall I share them with you? In Marika's own words, the Erd Tree governs all. The choice is thine. Become one with the Order, or divest thyself of it, to wallow at the fringes, a powerless upstart. O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both. Mine other self.
Having been given the order to take Radagon, a mere champion, as her consort, and understanding fully the reasons why, it is my theory that Marika quickly found herself without any real belief in the goodwill or beneficent hope represented by the greater will itself. We know that all of the assassins of Black Knives were close relations to Marika, not in blood, but at the very least in relationship. They knew her. They knew more than just of her. They were part of her entourage, or as close as one could be without being a demigod or a god themselves. And so, in my mind, Marika was at the very least complicit in the death of her son, Godwyn. She was pushed to the very limit, yes, but I don't think it was by Godwyn. It was by the continuing fusion of her and Radagon. It was by her forcing herself to continue to serve the greater will, a will she had grown to revile, a will which was conquering and replacing her flesh, her very mind, with the flesh and mind of another. And so, Marika took it upon herself to free the lands between. She put fear and limitations into the minds of the demigods by at least allowing, if not helping, to orchestrate or manipulating into existence the death of her son Godwyn. She shattered the Elden Ring, waiting until the tumultuous state in the lands between had reached its highest fever pitch, which could be reached under the restraint of the order that existed. For already Ranni was questioning the validity of the Golden Order and the greater will behind it, as was Rykard, her brother. And all of the demigods had a new profound fear of death, for they knew that somebody somewhere had stolen a shard of death, and this fear made them covetous of power, something they had never felt before, not in this way. For what must it be to live eternal and to be born a demigod or brought into demigod power by inheritance, only to one day discover that one of your own demigod relations, perhaps among the most famous still living, was killed in a way never before seen and never before suffered by your kind. Now that the runes of the Elden Ring had been shattered free, the demigods began to scatter and seek power, and those who had doubted the Golden Order took that moment to make their stands and statements, to create their strongholds, and plant the flags of their new patrons. Among these, predominant among these, were Praetor Rykard and his blasphemous serpent, and Mohg, and the great will of blood behind his twisted, perverted ambitions. But this had a greater effect than simply throwing the lands in between into chaos. Marika was imprisoned within the Erd Tree, and no authority was allowed to be taken. The entire country, such as it is, was thrown into utter chaos through decapitation of its leadership. Marika was silent. But what of Radagon, you might ask? Why did Radagon not take control? Yes, the Elden Ring was shattered, but Radagon himself was still, in some form, alive, still capable of enacting his will, coming out perhaps, and giving Morgoth some orders, if not the whole council, before the shattering truly began. And yet, that was not possible, for Radagon was forced to seal himself inside of the Erd Tree, along with Marika. You see, Radagon could not actually repair the Elden Ring, no matter how hard he tried. The only solution is a new Elden Lord. And it wasn't that Radagon was covetous of power, but, funny enough, that he lacked a certain kind of faith. You see, he saw the condition of the lands between, saw that his own son Rykard and his own daughter Ranni were now proponents of heretical beliefs and opinions, that Miquella had entirely abandoned the greater will, and was creating an Erd Tree of his own in the form of the Halig Tree. And of course, Malenia, the blade of Miquella, followed hot on his heels, willing to obey her brother's every whim, believing him to be the most supreme of the Empyreans, and loving him deeply besides. With Mohg on the loose, with Miquella unaccounted for, with Malenia likely to follow her brother through hell or high water, with Ranni's condition now throwing everything into flux and uncertainty, and with Rykard's growing blasphemies, Radagon came to a crushing realization, a realization Marika knew he would be forced to come to all along. He could not guarantee that the next Elden Lord would actually follow the path of the Golden Order, or even maintain the status quo. Anyone who walked through those doors had come bearing a heretical faith or a belief similar to Marika's. And that was something he simply could not allow to happen. And so Marika put him in an impossible decision. Radagon wanted to repair the Elden Ring, but the Elden Ring required a replacement, a new lord to hold the title of consort. It's even possible that, given the depth of their fusion, Radagon was no longer even capable of being considered an Elden Lord and was now functionally a god himself, something that is given credence by the golden sword that was crafted out of his very corpse by the Elden Beast. And as a god, he could not be Lord. He needed a Lord, and he would not be able to control or understand or predict whoever it was that would claim lordship, and he would not become what Marika had become. He would not become a tool for a will he utterly resented. Though he may have resented the responsibility and the curse that came with it, he loved the Golden Order. He believed in the greater will, and that is the impossible position. Wanting to repair the Elden Ring, yet lacking faith that the person who entered through to repair it would be on his side. And so, just in accordance with Marika's plan, the man who would be her jailer and her punisher was also her last safeguard. For, you see, the lands between, tormented and crushed as they are when you enter into the game at the start, are exactly the way that Marika wants them to be. They are in flux. They are in chaos, without the order of an outer god superimposed upon it. Oh yes, the forces of outer gods are present. The flame of frenzy has certainly made some kind of resurgence ever since the shattering, thanks to the chaos that has been unleashed. The Two Fingers still cling to some power and vestige of authority here within these lands. The god skinners can be seen taking their place among the people, an ancient faith that even predates, or I think predates, the Erd Tree itself, suddenly walking in modern times. Whatever foul serpent religion Rykard represents is also clearly alive. And Nihil, Mohg's own outer god, is present and has created her own sub-realm within the lands between. So it's not the case that the realm is free of their influence, but it's free of their control. There is still choice in the lands between, not one that is forced onto everyone. Everyone is still able to choose what they do, who they serve. You see, in this game, most of the outer gods represent order, an order of some kind. To be free of their shackles may very well necessitate struggle and chaos. Something revealed to you by a man who is none other than Ofnir, the All-Knowing.
I knew you'd come to stand before the Elden Ring, to become Elden Lord. What a sad state of affairs. I commend your spirit, but alas, none shall take the throne. Queen Marika has high hopes for us, that we continue to struggle unto eternity.
Ulfnir has not had any direct communication with Marika, but he is Ulfnir the All-Knowing. Having received all the information he can by this point, he has put together what her intentions must be. And it is that this struggle, this crucible, continue indefinitely. And who is her gate guardian? Who is the one that by his own credo must accomplish and facilitate this very thing? Radagon. That is, as I keep saying, his impossible position. He is a tool of Marika even as he torments her, and thus we come back to Marika's posture. Marika is metaphorically just as you see her when you enter. She is crucified, bound by the greater will into the posture you see her taking all of the time, the posture of her glory, arms spread. It is not because she wants to assume this posture. It is because the greater will enforces it onto her. And Radagon is the Crimson Spear. Not just in a literal sense, but Radagon is quite literally impaling her very existence. He is the spear of the faith thrust into her constrained form to force her obeisance, to kill her will, her own mind. When you enter into the chamber of the Erd Tree and you see Marika, you see more than simply her physical representation in that instant. You see Marika as she has been mentally and spiritually ever since the moment she married Radagon, since the moment the unwilling fusion began. And we know when that moment occurred. It occurred the moment she was married to him. It had to, because it was at that moment that Radagon's children, previously not demigods, became demigod stepchildren. For the power of divinity is one which corrupts time itself, and when the fusion began, Radagon's blood became retroactively divine. And thus Radagon and Rykard and Ranni all became, if they weren't before, demigods in absolute truth. And that is the meaning behind the posture you find her in when you enter the Erd Tree. There are some that believe that Radagon and Marika were always fused, always conjoined, and there is some evidence for that, though, in my opinion, that evidence is simply the result of the time-corrupting ability of divine blood, and how it works retroactively even past memory. But I think that the fusion of Radagon and Marika was very much planned and in line with the Greater Will and the Golden Order, and I can find only one good piece of evidence to show that this was all very much according to plan and meant to be taken as the law of the land once it became open, and open it would become. For you see, that sculptor was allowed by Radagon to see that he was Marika, and he was allowed to inscribe for all to see that secret upon stone inside the royal capital, a secret that would be open to any of the fundamentalists who would be high enough ranking to receive the law of regression as a spell incantation. And more than that, the actual inscription before the statue reads, "Radagon is Marika," and it says so in no uncertain terms. This is propaganda. This is a statue placed here in preparation for the day when Radagon would have to be accepted as the new god. And Marika would not have it.
Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past.
I commend your spirit, but alas, none shall take the throne.
Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me.
Queen Marika has high hopes for us, that we continue to struggle.
Let us be shattered, both